They say some dogs hereabouts are mad dogs, you know, with rabies. But not my dog. We went everywhere together in the summer of 1921. I tried not to bother folks, and he tried not to bite them. I remember the traveling annual people performing in front of the old Eller Hotel, the Italian man with a floppy felt hat from Philadelphia, with his hand turning the crank on his organ, his monkey with a tin cup. I remember the old man with the 500-pound brown bear that walked on his hind legs and even tried to make it up one of our telephone poles. I remember just as the flower blossoms were out, the traveling accordion players who would sit up street on the wall, unleashing a cascade of musical joy. Like the Billmeyer boys, we'd visit Mr. Roma Seltzer Pendleton's candy store to suck up fireballs and chew on licorice strings. A nurse at school inspected our mouths and said most of us had cavities that belonged in the quarry at Blairton. Even though there always was some adult nearby telling us to be at home before dark or not to fall on the town run, Mr. Davis Billmeyer would close his grocery store at the top of the street and lead the town's white children Pied Piper style down Princess Street and down to Flat Rock. Except he didn't drown us like rats. He taught us how to make a clean running dive off the rock into the water, and so clear you could almost count the pebbles on the bottom in 5 feet of water. No more skinny dipping, no. You could see us from the railroad tracks. Even if Reverend Flickinger at the Dutch Reformed Church said Sunday had gone from a holy day to a holiday, the terrible heat that summer drove us in record numbers to the riverside. Princess Street became a swimming pool for Floyd Flickinger, Brooks Lucas, the Shipley, Hodges, and Mellister boy on Sunday, September 4th, when a tremendous rain submerged Frog Island in the run and backed up, and it washed out a good bit of Ben Harps's produce in his nursery on King Street, which he tended in between his rural mail deliveries. At least he had some good cucumber dills to show at the fair. You know which one I mean, the Morgan Grove Fair? Which was set for the very next day. Noting our general displeasure at the lack of entertainments at the fair the year before, Mr. C.S. Musser promised a big fair with new grandstands and dance hall. More people paid the $2 fee on the first day than for the entire week at the fair the year before. Because you could see acts like the cyclist Daredevil Doherty, Hill's Comedy Circus, the great tumbler Helen Jackley, the Duclos Brothers Clowns, and a spectacular twice-a-day performance by the trapeze artist who were from an ascended hot air balloon. All this plus the usual endless array of exhibits for best chickens, sheep, milk cows, hogs, horses, and delicious homemade cakes, pies, and homegrown vegetables. September meant, as it still does, back to school, too. Shepherd College's new president, W.H.S. White, saw 160 new students enrolled, even though the Eller Hotel had not yet been completely renovated yet to be a boys' dormitory. Efforts were made this time to discourage enrollment of high school students in pre-college courses. They had enough venturesome boys for the college's first football team, though. Half the boys tried out. Canuti Hall became mostly a high school for town kids, except for an embarrassment of a basketball court in the basement. Shepherd's men and women players dribbled around 2 posts at mid-court. Plans for a new gym were already in the works at the corner of High and Princess. And there was charming young Reva Copenhaver, who came to Shepherd by train, for the very first time from her family farm near Carneysville. President White had a gap in his faculty starting team with the departure of the Muldoon family and Professor J.D. Muldoon. The state hired him away to Charleston. He was the most popular professor, they say. But Professor A.D. Kenneman, who lived in the home at the site of James Rumsey's home, and Professor Ella Mae Turner were still here to vitalize young minds. At the graded school, kids came and still started every day with religious readings and songs, but the new principal, George Frazier, lived by an ironclad honesty and skepticism for teenage smoking, even if it was just the corn silk and hand-rolled type. But there were more kids because the school board decided to close down the Shepherd Grade School and bring the country kids to town by school bus. It was a budget-cutting measure. The school board head, Dr. George Banks, one of 2 or 3 town doctors and a doctor to many of the town's poor, appointed Mr. Canode. He also had his eye on a young man, John Wesley Harris, who just graduated from Storer College. Now, Dr. Banks knew his respected and reliable parents, his mother a laundress and a mother of 3, and Mr. Harris, a good man by all accounts, who ran the threshing machine at many farms come harvest time. Now, although John Wesley Harris wanted to become a doctor, family finances and the urgings of Dr. Banks brought him back home to teach. The Harrises had a chance to buy their own home if they could make the $2.80 a week payments on it for 7 to 8 years. Now, John Wesley Harris would be able to earn $85 a month to that goal. Shepherdstown's blacks mostly found work in homes, on farms, in the quarries where they broke the lime and carried it to trucks for loading, and closer to home at the apple packing operation of E.L. Goldsboro, Sam Skinner, and George McKee, located behind the present-day site of Southern States. They needed about a dozen people in the packing house and others to pick the short crop of York Imperials and Ben Davis apples that had been diminished by a spring frost. Now, the big night out each week was Saturday night, when stores stayed open till midnight, and exhausted farmers and their wives and most everyone came to town to sell their dairy products to the stores, buy dry goods and sugar, and just visit up a storm from one end of the street to the other. Things have changed, but in that day and age, Shepherdstown's black people intuitively sensed it was prudent to avoid large crowds of white folks, be it along the river or in town on Saturday. Except for a bold few, they were home by 6 and remained there. In those days, white townspeople cared enough to buy new musical instruments for the McCann brothers, Frank Walker, and Ben Whiting's musical band, and they also gave a grieving black family friend their car in the event of a funeral. Still, blacks were expected to step off a narrow curb as a row of white folks approached, or to remove their hats when addressed. Moreover, certain restaurants wouldn't serve them, except in carry-out by a side entrance. And blacks who left town for any extended period who owned homes often found their homes sold out from under them, if they had been at all delinquent in paying their taxes. Thank God life has changed, and thank God we have changed. Kids, boy did they love Saturday night. If you were a kid, you could start with a vanilla soda at Hill's Pharmacy, now Thornton's Pharmacy, maybe get a few homemade potato chips from the little shop at New and Princess Street, and off you'd go to catch a show at Mr. Musser's Opera House. except for the Molester boy, who had to sit out a few shows on account of the time when he aimed a real gun at the movie screen in progress from an adjacent back window and fired a nail through it. At auctions or anywhere, farmer folk love to talk about weather, prices, market forces, gadgets, gizmos. That September night, you could hear a lot of worried talk about the 12-cent slip that week in the corn prices, down to 45 cents a bushel. It had been $1.50 just 2 years before. But you know, you didn't have to pay as much mind to your dog now that Howard Canode's nasty little bulldog Dewey finally picked one too many fights with the farm dog and died. Hunting season was coming up soon for rabbit and squirrel. Even talk of seeing a deer here and there in the area. You know, some farmers thought it was hunting season on driving machines. While Orville and Wilbur Spahn, yep, I said Orville and Wilbur, shoed old Dan Patch for a quarter, there'd be hoots about those steel-tired tractors that broke down more than a three-legged horse. All the National Highway Garage's slick ads didn't fool anybody. And farmers, well, everybody, loved to give detailed accounts of the foolishness that seemed to plague the status-conscious and automobile-smitten upper crust. Like old First Gear Wysong, who earned his nickname for the manner in which he negotiated a steep hill. Or Harry Goldsboro, who ran out in front of a driver from Ranson on Main Street and got a tire right over his midsection and apologized for his carelessness. My fault. My medical bill. Or 73-year-old E.H. Reinhardt tearing around a hill road in Hancock and going down a ravine over and over 2 full times, ending upright in the woods with just some cracked side windows and some bewildered passengers. Mr. Scully and most everyone had to take care not to break off their little thumbs trying to crank start the earlier car models. Oh, maybe we'll get the old car another chance. Why don't we go on down to the National Highway Garage and see Mr. Russell White and George Freeman. I hear the Fords have been cut down for the 3rd time this year. They cost only $504. And old Dulicker Wells, the best mechanic in town, they say, could also give us a tip. Yeah, but besides cars, farmers like to talk about how the whoppers went out at the fish pot at Terrapin Neck one day that summer, frying up a pile of eels raked out of the fish pot near dam number 4 and just fried up by a fire at dusk right there along the river. Yeah, and those fish pot suppers were topped off with some whiskey and peach brandy from the stills at Frog Hollow. Yes, indeed. Just the other day, the newspaper says a fella checked his fish pot, you know, on the Apecan. Huh. Poor fella found this little body of a lifeless infant. And you know old Brandy's fastball, Brandy Myers, he sure warmed old Elk Shipley's mitt all summer long, didn't he? Beating most everybody they played, except that New Brunswick team. You know, Brandy tried the semi-pros once, the story goes, but he came home because he got homesick for his girl and his town. He and Lester Waldeck and Raleigh Shell gave haircuts on Saturday night, right there on Main Street. You could hear the more sober-toned discussions about junk dealer Luria's decision to call it quits because he said the freight rates on the railroad ruined his business. Farmers and others in the cement and timber businesses wondered too if the railroad wasn't getting a bit too generous in setting its shipping rates for the Pacific Coast farmers, making their produce competitively priced in East Coast markets. And there was also talk about the hard times of the Sandbauer family and the C&O Canal. It looked like the end of the line for the canal and that way of life. This fall, the canal closed 2 months early because the Navy short-ordered on coal from Cumberland, oil, which could be cheaply shipped from Texas to Washington, D.C. ports, now could easily match the coal prices. Most everybody with a dairy had electricity, and the phone was a standard item now, thanks in part to the guy whose brilliant mind you just loved to pick on Saturday night. U.S. Martin, former mayor and founder of the Shepherdstown Power and Light Company, got everybody into the electricity bandwagon early by putting his own hydroelectric power generator at the bottom of Town Run to saw farmers' timber. And now he had one in the Town Run to power his gas station, Princess and High Street. His biggest mill had already been sold to Mr. I.F.P. Good. Read that, I feel pretty good, who also recently sold it in turn in a broken down state to Luther Thompson, and Tim Carter. They'd still grind our grain for us. The mill was once a real headache for U.S. when the kids used to climb up in their usual creative annex and would take a flying leap off a rock and grab onto the conveyor belt running from the mill to the wheel, and they'd ride it in. For greater efficiency and to keep any child from being unceremoniously ground in little bits, Martin moved the wheel closer to the mill. Now these days, the Thompson Carter mill was all there was since the Whiting's mill had burned down one night a few years before. That was at the site of the Southern State Store. Laws, laws, and laws, and more laws. Now the latest bother, besides fishing and hunting licenses, was the purity of the liquids issue. The state health inspector recently inspected the 8 town pumps and found that most were contaminated. They had to be shut down, including the venerable old Grant's pump there up on Main Street. Citizens were also being urged to tie into the town water system. Which ironically would neatly deliver all the town's wastewater out to Flat Rock where we swam. Oh well, they call it progress. Now the health inspectors were also getting on us for having milk that wasn't pasteurized, and they meant business. Diphtheria was the most lethal disease in the state at that time, due, they say, to poor sanitation. Now, around town as we go shopping on Saturday night, there was business to be done. Harrison Schley could arrange a loan at Jefferson Security Bank, and across the street, Uncle Matt and Aunt Hattie Tolliver sold the best ice cream and sandwiches at their Big Corner restaurant, where there used to be a double door on the corner. Stumpy Canode was running his butchering operation in an adjacent building. The close of the Antler had knocked a lot of business out of the Tolliver livery business. S.J. Hodges' store, where the reunion is today, was for serious farm talk and trading. Hodges ran the 2 freight elevators in town with Mr. Lemon. Across the street, Keith Cano's building was a garage run by Charlie Morgan, where visitors got their gas at 27 cents a gallon. Mr. Ashton Boswell's grocery was next door, followed by a door to a student's residence hall. And in Mountain Enterprises today, There was Mr. Cooley's grocery. But still, the kids went to Mr. B.S. Pendleton's store, the next door up, for their candy. Across the street, after Hill's Pharmacy, which is today run by the Thorntons, Mr. Clark was a shoemaker. Next door up, old Jake Cookus finally gave up his butchering business to his boys. Often horrifying many with his boast that drink and animal blood enhanced a robust constitution, he nevertheless loved kids and always remembered our names. Miss Myers and Miss Burkhart went to the post office like just about everybody every day in today's Mecklenburg Inn, though the Malones would move their plumbing business there in the downstairs area very soon. Mr. Clean was John Shawpert, still selling confectionaries and the like in Welshan's building, since his own store burned down in the fire across the street. After the Waldeck, Myers, and Shell barber shop and today's hedge hunter's shop was Miss Mann's millinery shop. The only hotel was in Bob Shipley's restaurant, where Betty's is located today. And next door to that was a town telephone exchange. Across the alley, H.L. Snyder ran the Shepherdstown Register upstairs. Downstairs was the ever-popular Owens drugstore. Mr. T.B. Line was in Mr. Piercy's paint store. Dr. Robert Gibson's drugstore was where the town kids went after school, where they bought records, stationery, pencils, and salves. Dr. Myers had recently left to practice upstairs following the tragic death of Uncle George Frazier, who lived with them. Always one to wear tucks and tails at the front of parades, Uncle George had fallen from a fourth-floor window at King's Daughters Court earlier in the year. Even though a woman smoking a cigarette was still a scandal, Shepherdstown's white women were proud of their political voice, and the Women's Club was organized. Charlotte Pendleton Goldsboro, a forceful and culturally minded citizen, also became the first president that year of what was the forerunner of the county's League of Women Voters. They began leasing the first floor of the Oddfellows Hall in hopes of having a library there. A sort of men's club existed behind it at Steve Dandridge's farm implement shop, nicknamed the Mugnet Club, which, as you might know, is a form of dominoes. Steve, known to kiss the ladies of church aisle by aisle after service, and clumsy as always with the billiards cue stick, was still ever popular and soon would retire. Across the street, Miss Mary Sheets still fumed as cars stirred up dust in front of her home. What would later be Hanzo's venerable five and dime in today's Greg Didden Realty was the man with the meat, Charlie Waters, the town's third butcher. In October, John Miller and his family would buy George Freeman's model bakery, located behind Charlie Waters' place, and the restaurant next door. They'd fix it up with an electronic piano player and marble adornments, and it would be the rage of the college students. They came to dance. Their son, Bus, would soon catch the music bug and would become a fine accordionist. Mason Rush planned to sell his grocery business to Mr. Tabler, just 2 doors up. Saturday night was also a good time to take a baseball to Mr. Jack Shaner's leather shop to be restitched, or to have your harness rethreaded and waxed. He was located in the Independent building. While Mr. Davis Billmeyer grocered next door, Ben Whiting probably gave a shoe shine or two to some of the patrons of the Opera House, located just 1 door up. Now, Eddie Billmeyer owned the rest of that side of the street. He lived in the next building, renting part of it out, and also renting another part out for George Billmeyer's cash and carry store that was always trumpeting record low bargains in the town paper. building on the corner was the Farmers Bank, where Ed was cashier. Matthews and Shank is in that building today. But the king of the merchants was Tug H.C. Martin. With an E, thank you. His shovel, pick, fork, whatnot emporium and today's on-track video, The Laundromat, and Al's Pizza, under the proud banner, H.C. Martin's Great Cheap Hardware Store. Nervous about the prompt service of the Sears mail order people, he often told people, if you didn't have a requested item, no, but I'll have a carload in tomorrow. And you can kick me in the behind if you want to make sure I don't forget. Yeah, H.C. Martin was the consummate salesman showman. Saturday evening is coming to an end now. It's time for the weekly bath and to cleanse one of the week's earthly concerns. For tomorrow is Sunday, strictly God's day. No work, just family, fishing maybe, and definitely church. Miss Violet taught Sunday school for disadvantaged children in the Jefferson Security Bank. The town fairly vibrated with sermons and hymns. But Sunday wasn't a holiday for dreaming. No, not for kids. Kids still ran to see the Norfolk and Western train roared and puffed through on Sunday. And everyone still stopped to watch and dream as an airplane in its unseeming flight flowed through the air above. We were struck with awe. Trains and airplanes were going to be a magical vehicle to a magical land, the land of tomorrow. And we kids yearned to be the first ones there. The days of the Gypsies were dying fast. In 1921, even the Gypsies had a car. George Canode and O.E. Kretzer tell of the boy who walked his bike across the footbridge to Bridgeport. Instead of riding it, he walked it just to save 2 cents. Old George told me, that's what built this country. That's what made America great. Ain't it the truth? Ain't it the truth?